Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops to Podium, the Rev Partners podcast, where we talk to execs who competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I am the co-founder and CEO of Rev Partners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Donald Monistere for this episode of Pit Stops to Podium. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here, man. I can't wait to get started.
Likewise. And so just for our audience to have a little background on who Donald is, Donald, you're currently serving as the CEO and president of General Informatics. And for our audience who may not know who that is, this is your opportunity to give your elevator pitch and maybe just a little bit of background on you in terms of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to do that. And, you know, we're an IT provider, and I always tell our guys, look, make the elevator pitch easy. And our company helps companies with their technology. If you have technology within your office, man, you're a prospect for us. So what General Informatics really is a 21-year-old business that's kind of behaving like a startup these days because we're growing very, very fast. We're doing that through acquisition, and we're doing that organically as well. But we're an IT services provider. We provide those services as a managed services provider. So if you're looking to contract us, your entire IT support, your entire IT experience, we provide it in that manner. So I always tell people, hey, if you're using technology in your business, we can help you out. And as far as my background, I've been doing IT for my entire career. So I graduated from a small university, Southeastern Louisiana University here in Louisiana, and immediately got involved in IT. And my whole process was, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. And this PC thing sounds really interesting. So I might want to go figure out something about that. And that's how I got into IT. And I've been in it ever since. I started a company in 1993, grew it for 15 years, sold it to private equity in 2008, merged with a larger company, eventually became the president of that company. And we sold that company to Ceasefire in 2018. So I took a little bit of a break from IT. I still stayed in technology. And then, you know, I was living in Birmingham, Alabama for the last 27 years. And a private equity company out of Dallas called me and said, hey, how'd you like to come back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana and run another IT company? I was like, man, I can't say no to that. So that's kind of my background. And honestly, everything today that I've learned is really from being around fantastic people and folks who have invested in me, for that matter, and helped, you know, me along and learn the things that we need to learn in order to do the kind of things that we do, the high growth, whether it be through acquisition or organically.
I love that. And you also have the distinction of the best background of any of our guests so far. So congratulations on that. You also have that in your in your bio. Well, Donald, thank you for sharing a little bit more about your past. And before we get into our big idea, we do have a tradition here at Pit Stops to Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. So what are 3 fun facts that our audience should know about you?
3 fun facts. Well, let's see. There's a bunch of fun facts. I've got 4 kids, and they are fantastic. They range in age from 36 all the way down to 21. So I always say I've got 3 of them out of the liability column and into the asset column. I got 1 more to move. So, fun fact, back in 1989, I qualified for the Mr. Universe bodybuilding contest. So
wow,
that most people don't realize that I've done. And I'm also a 3rd Dan degree black belt in a rare Japanese martial arts. In fact, I fought a little bit of MMA for a very short period of time. But trust me, I have a ton of respect for those guys and gals who do that, because that you wake up in pain just about every single morning. So.
Well, how do you still keep yourself active these days?
I still train, pretty much daily. I'm either lifting or doing some sort of martial arts. I find it best for me to do it really early in the morning. I usually get up at 4 o'clock. I have the same routine. I get up at 4 o'clock. I write for 15 minutes. I read for 15 minutes, and then I work for 30, and then I'm in the gym. And I'm usually in the gym for about 2 hours before the day starts. So, at 8 a.m., when people are kind of, dragging in, I've already been up for 4 hours and
Wow.
excited to be at work, man.
Well, I don't know if any of your 4 kids are girls, but I'm sure that first meeting with the boyfriend with the dad is always a fun conversation based off your background.
It is, absolutely. They're like, hey, haven't I seen you on TV? I'm like, yeah, I was fighting. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, don't mess with my daughter.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing a little bit more about kind of who you are, because at the end of the day, we're people. We're not just what we do at work. So that's always fun to hear. Well, Donald, you talked a little bit about it earlier. In light of our audience, when we talk about high growth to high scale, there are different ways to build your business. And of course, there's the organic way, but at some point, naturally, there's interest from outside folks as it relates to, you mentioned PE in your background and ultimately acquisition. And so I think it would be a really pertinent topic for us to really engage in this idea of, in the event that there is acquisition, how do you integrate two companies well in the midst of that growth or scale phase? And in light of your experience, I think this is a really, you can speak into that. So I'm really excited for this time we have together.
Yeah. So, man, it's a great topic. It's a great question. And private equity is always looking for industries that they can consolidate and find synergies and find a way to really grow that company very quickly. And, my background formally is in operations. And so I wasn't really an IT guy. I just happened to know IT pretty well, going into my career and being able to fall back on my operational knowledge was really helpful. And I really didn't know I was kind of setting myself up for being kind of a private equity darling, so to speak, because they recognize, hey, not only does he have the technology background, but he also understands how operational workflow works and how you can create a management framework that allows you to scale the business. So you're working on process, you're working on operational maturity, you're trying to find ways to standardize the way that you deliver services as opposed to just throwing people, at that whole process. But the thing that you have to do when you take on that kind of challenge is you really have to protect the investment from the very beginning. So usually the way they do this is they buy a platform company that they feel like is doing a fantastic job of delivering services. Maybe they differentiate the product a little bit different than someone else, and they feel like they have a real niche, maybe even in an industry vertical. And then we start looking for other acquisitions that really create synergies, whether it's additive from a standpoint of services or additive from a standpoint of geography. We're looking for those really strategic acquisitions. So it's not just, hey, we go buy anybody that's looking to sell. And that first stage, when you start talking to them, the diligence part is probably the most important part of really protecting that investment, because the more you know about that organization, how deep their relationships are with their customers and their vendors, because that's obviously you have to have vendors to help you provide services to your customers, understanding their whole supply chain and how it works. It's really crucial to taking that business to the next level. And one of the things that we always look for is, I don't want just a company that, hey, we grew and we made some profit, now we're ready to sell. I want to see a company that is looking to grow even further, but just they don't have the funds maybe, or they've never experienced that kind of scale or that kind of growth. And so we target those types of companies. So we get behind them and fuel them with support from a finance perspective, support from a management perspective, and then really grow that organization.
Got it. So if I heard you right, it's, you have the umbrella or the parent, I think, or you're describing it in terms of, for one reason or another, it could be their position in the market, it could be their process in terms of how they run their operations, it could be the technology, but there's something about them that says, hey, this is the blueprint. And then it relates to and you're thinking through growing through acquisition, it's the additive concept of how can we expand our reach, whether it's from a geography or services or a product line, and identifying those companies that have something that you can, not only that allows or facilitates that, and you're providing the infrastructure from that parent to ultimately drive increased revenue, it sounds like, through the two organizations.
Yeah, and when we do this sort of thing, we don't jettison the idea of we could organically grow into a territory as well. If we have relationships, if we know that we can go into a territory and capture market share very quickly, that's actually less expensive than going through the acquisition process. But to truly get scale very quickly and find, kind of leverage in that model, because as you can imagine, and I'll make it easy, because as we do these acquisitions, you might imagine, well, there's, one company doesn't need 4 CFOs. So the guys who are being acquired, they recognize that maybe a principal, that may be a CFO, and they're either, hey, I'd like to do something else, or look, I'm just going to move on, and that way you're synergizing the organization and making sure that those guys are working in kind of their highest and best use. So it works really well to do it both organically as well as through acquisition. The real key is, how do you know when to start that whole integration process, and how do you know when to integrate and what to integrate? And that is probably the most important part of growing through acquisition, because as you can imagine, as you're integrating processes and procedures, if you buy another company, then it's like, okay, here's a whole nother company that has different processes and different tool sets that they use. So what do we do? How do we do that? And so basically what you have to do is break down that whole integration process up into steps. And the first step is communicate. And you almost have to over communicate to the company that you're acquiring. Typically, the company that is doing the acquiring, they know, they're probably involved in many of the conversations. We run a very transparent organization. So when we're looking at someone to acquire, we typically will let them know, maybe not their name because we're under NDA, but we'll let them know, hey, we're looking in this territory. This is the next step for us. But for the guys who typically get acquired, they probably found out maybe 1 or 2 weeks before they meet me, like, hey, who is this new guy that's my boss, right? And so the main thing is to communicate exactly what the plan is. I've been fortunate in that every acquisition I've done has been additive and it's been part of growth. So you're never having that really tough conversation of, hey, we're going to cut 20% of the staff. We're always needing more talent. We're always needing more engineers. We're needing more consultants. So we always bring those folks in and typically give them more opportunity and maybe even a more standardized way to deliver the services. So it makes them, better at their craft. So most of the time, folks are really excited. I always say people are scared of change, but I tell them from the very beginning, hey, look, guys, nobody's getting cut. And as much as people are scared of change, you're going to be calling me in, 90 to 180 days and go, hey, what, where's all the change that you were talking about? Because it is a very stepped process. And so once you get through that communication process, then we do what we call the near-term integration phase. And that near term is really just getting the back office accounting working, maybe centralized marketing, centralized purchasing, because those are things that typically a matrix business model would handle. So you'd want to try to centralize that as best you can. And keep in mind, when I say centralized, I don't necessarily mean, oh, it has to physically happen back at headquarters. I mean, from a management perspective, it has to be centralized, because today, where you sit doesn't really matter, especially, we're a technology company, so we better be able to work remotely, because that's what we install most of the time is helping clients figure out how they can utilize their technology from a remote perspective and be connected at any time. And then after you do that near-term integration, and this is the hardest part for me as an executive, and most companies get this wrong that go through this process, is you have to operate for 6 months to 12 months and just understand truly what differentiates their business, because the last thing you want to do is during integration potentially take something out of what they do that suddenly devalues the service that they provide. I mean, we paid money for that service. We want to make sure that we keep that service being delivered in the fashion that made it valuable to the client base. So, man, we sit back, we try to take, a very critical eye and be patient and watch how people are operating and watch what each other are doing and how we might do it versus how they do it. And then the whole time we're documenting and making sure that we are evaluating those workflows. And we always say best idea wins. So if there's overlapping processes, we're looking for the best idea, and you get to learn a lot during that process. And then then you build the plan to do the longer term integration, and hopefully 12 to 18 months later, you're completely integrated. And at GI, we bought 4 companies in 11 months. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So for us, we get to do 4 integrations at one time, which is actually an advantage because it'll allow us to address this once, as opposed to, now we got to address a lot more, but, we address it once as opposed to addressing it 4 different times. So we're off to the races, man. This time, I'd say in 2020, when I started, in November, we had 43 employees. We've got over 200 now.
Wow.
And so in 14, 15 months, whatever that is, we've really grown the organization, and it's fun to see this kind of growth. And I've, like I said, I've had the opportunity to do it in the past and do it before. So, getting to do this again is I'm really fortunate to have that opportunity.
That's great. So, which is fun when we speak on this topic, just in light of your experience. So, if I heard the framework right in terms of steps, you've got communication is kind of the first piece. Then you're moving into this kind of short term or near term. I think you were talking more about like almost like consolidation of how do we think through a process, tech stack, et cetera. And then it moves into that next phase where it's kind of observations and understanding. There's a reason why we acquired this company. And so let's understand what makes them truly unique and understand what that asset is. And then it's moving into that kind of not final, but that next phase where it's the iteration of, I think you said best idea wins, where we're collaborating and we're almost like united in how we're going to market and working together. Yeah.
And I mean, again, the thing that a lot of companies that go through this acquisition process, they make a mistake and kind of rubber stamping all of their processes and procedures over that organization. And sometimes it makes it, it takes away the very thing that made that organization valuable. And it's just because they didn't take enough time to watch how the operation worked, listen, maybe, definitely give feedback and ideas of maybe how to improve in certain areas. That's one of the things that I've loved about doing the 4 acquisitions that we've done. We've had the leaders from all 4 of those companies sit down and talk about their product and their services and how passionate they are and how they do their delivery. And it creates this think tank, if you will, of, hey man, that's a really interesting idea. We never thought about it that way. We're going to do that a little different in our model. And then eventually the models start to come together. And so it's not easy. I can't, I said it really easily. It came out, but it's not easy to do. But at the end of the day, it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling because eventually you get everyone rowing the boat in the same direction. And it really does create a phenomenal experience because it creates a very valuable company, which is what, private equity is investing in in the first place.
Yeah, it seems like there's a humility involved of we don't have all the answers. And what that it ultimately does is empowers other people to feel like they have a voice. And to your point, they're rowing in the same direction. They have a seat at the table, and they're able to impact and influence the trajectory of this combined entity. Because to your point earlier, it's like if you don't have that, you don't have the communication, and you don't have the trust, then you're going to lose that from these people that you just acquired or the company you just acquired. And so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So Don, last question on this is when is that integration truly done? Or is that even a thing?
Yeah, that's I like the way you asked that question because it's a thing. And I think we recognize in some of the acquisitions that we did in my former employer is that you really kind of have to define that because you could spin your wheels and think, hey, we're still in this integration process. So I said, hey guys, let's define what we mean when we say integrated. And we came up with a definition and whether or not this is a correct definition or not, it was correct for us. And it resonates even today. Is when your procurement and the services that you deliver are being done with like processes and procedures, then you're integrated. And it shouldn't matter what location you're doing it from, what industry vertical you might be serving, whether it's the East region or the West region, if you're delivering that service in the same manner across the board. And I say generally speaking, because you can't, not every nuance is going to be accounted for, then you're really integrated and you move into what we call the continual improvement process because, if you can imagine, we've got 4 different companies with 4 different tool sets with 4 different, but we deliver a similar service. And so what we have to do is make sure that the way that we deliver the service has value and can be standardized, because when we do both of those things, it creates efficiencies of scale. So when we add 10 clients, maybe we don't need 2 people, we only needed 1. And so while it's a growth story, it always has been a growth story, we just don't have to grow the labor base nearly as fast as we would if we wouldn't have had those standard procedures before. So that's kind of our barometer. And when we see that we're delivering services the same way, and again, we may be doing it with different tool sets, that's okay, because the service itself is the same. The way we procure, within our supply chain is the same. Once we do that, we're integrated, and then everything else goes into what we call our continual improvement initiative. And that's usually when we start addressing tool sets and, does it make sense for us to standardize the tool sets that we're using? Should we all be on the same CRM platform? Should we all be on the same ticketing platform? My answer typically is yes to those 2 questions, but there may be a reason why a very specific vertical should use a different tool set. You just have to evaluate those and make those decisions based on the data, not emotion, because there is a lot of emotion that goes into that. Because the guy who's used the same CRM tool for the last 7 years, he doesn't want to change, right?
Yep.
But the question is, hey, how does that add value to our customer? And what can we do to really increase the efficiency of how we're delivering the service, so that as we grow the organization, because we find that the more momentum that we have through acquisition and organic growth, it's exponential, because our base of customers to grow within continues to get larger. So that's kind of our definition, and man, it's great when we get to that continual improvement stage, because it does kind of change how we approach the whole process of growth.
Yeah, I think, and what you described earlier is that, look, you're not claiming this is easy, but what this does do is it removes some of that friction that would cause M&A activity to be unsuccessful. Yeah. And by doing some of that, I would say intentionality up front in terms of communication, listening, and having that humility to understand, probably allows you to be successful, or at least allows people to feel like we talk about that voice, but also willing to change or willing to adopt new things. So it's a credit to you. Well, Donald, this has been really informative for me. I love hearing about frameworks. And I love hearing, and this is the first time we've really talked about, we talk about scaling, how acquisition plays into that in terms of growth. So it was a really good topic for me, and I'm sure for our audience. How could our audience engage with you as a practical next step? So best way to get in touch with me is via email. My email address is donm@geninf.com, geninf.com. And, or you can just go to our website, geninf.com, and fill out a contact form and say, hey, I saw this podcast and I want to talk to Don. I'm happy to have a conversation and talk about, management frameworks. I've actually published 2 books, one of them specifically about frameworks. I've got 2 more, hopefully, that will be out before the end of the year. So if you want to check me out on Amazon.com, just search my name, Donald Monistere, you'll see the books. And if you're Kindle reader or you like Audible, they're in all formats. My last question is, when do you sleep in light of all the things that you do?
I grind 24/7. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks for stopping by. We really do appreciate your insight, and thank you for providing your email for those that want to reach out to you. And I look forward to reading your books.
All right, man. Thank you. Sounds good.
See ya.